Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Ben Carter was 41 and had a routine that many would consider boring. He woke up at 6 in the morning, made coffee while listening to history podcasts, reviewed lessons for his high school students, and came home at 4 in the afternoon. He'd been a teacher for 15 years and had taught at the same school since graduating. He genuinely enjoyed turning dates and names into stories his students actually remembered. He wasn't rich, but he had stability. He wasn't adventurous, but he had purpose. And he had Sophie. Sophie Carter, formerly Sophie Morrison, was 36 and everything Ben thought he'd never get. A personal trainer with a sculpted body, an easy laugh, and infectious energy, they'd met 7 years earlier at a gym where Ben had been trying, mostly unsuccessfully, to lose the extra weight he'd gained over years of grading papers on the couch. Sophie trained him, motivated him, and cracked jokes about his lack of coordination until Ben finally gathered the courage to ask her out to dinner. She said yes. They got married 2 years later in a small ceremony in the backyard of his parents' house. Their house had been a wedding gift from Ben's parents, who'd since moved to Florida. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a generous yard in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. Ben loved technology as a hobby. Over the past 2 years, he'd turned the house into something his students would call a smart home. Voice-controlled thermostat, color-changing light bulbs, security cameras at the entrance, and Alexa devices in practically every room, the bedroom, the living room, the kitchen, even the home office where Ben planned his lessons. Sophie tolerated it all patiently, though she sometimes rolled her eyes when Ben spent 20 minutes explaining how he'd programmed automated routines. But something had changed about 3 months ago. Sophie started unplugging the devices. At first, Ben thought it was just coincidence. He'd come home after a workout session and find the Echo Dot in the living room unplugged. Then it was the one in the kitchen. Then the one in the bedroom. The first time he asked about it, Sophie just shrugged and said she was starting to appreciate silence more, that spending all day talking to clients drained her and she liked coming home to peace and quiet. Ben accepted that. It made sense. Sophie worked with people all day, giving private strength and functional training sessions at irregular hours, dealing with demanding clients and conversations about diets and goals. Maybe she really did need quiet. Ben started turning off the devices himself when he got home, to respect her space. But he noticed a strange pattern. Sophie didn't unplug the devices when she was alone doing chores or watching TV. She only unplugged them when she was in the bedroom with the door shut, or in the living room taking certain phone calls. She always asked Ben for privacy during those moments. Privacy had never been an issue in their marriage. Ben trusted Sophie completely. She had a passcode on her phone but sometimes left it unlocked on the table. Ben never felt the need to check it, he just wasn't that kind of person. But the word privacy started showing up far too often. Sophie asked for privacy to take calls from clients. She asked for privacy when working on her laptop in the office. She asked for privacy when going to the bedroom to rest in the middle of the afternoon. And she always unplugged the Alexa first. Ben tried not to dwell on it. He was in the middle of the semester, prepping students for state exams, with stacks of assignments to grade. Trust had always been the foundation of their marriage. If Sophie needed space, he'd give her space. But a small unease began to grow, like an ant crawling under his skin. He started noticing other details. Sophie smiling at her phone more often. Sophie leaving for training sessions that lasted 3, sometimes 4 hours. Sophie showering as soon as she got home, even when she said the workout had been light. Sophie wearing a new, more expensive perfume that Ben didn't remember buying for her. One Thursday night, they had an argument. Ben couldn't even remember what it was about, something trivial, like dishes in the sink or a wet towel on the floor. It escalated quickly. Sophie said Ben was controlling, that he was suffocating her, that she couldn't stand being treated like a child anymore. Ben was confused. He'd barely spoken to her lately, how could he be suffocating her? He tried to calm things down, but Sophie was already grabbing her bag, throwing clothes into a backpack, saying she was going to stay at her sister's. She said she needed space and would be back over the weekend to talk things through calmly. Ben was left alone in the empty house, staring at the door Sophie had slammed on her way out. The argument made no sense. Nothing had made sense for months. He sat on the living room couch, the house silent around him, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. That's when he noticed the Echo Dot in the living room was plugged in again. Sophie must have forgotten to unplug it in her rush to leave. Ben looked at the device, that small cylinder with its soft blue pulse. He remembered that the entire house was connected to a cloud-based Amazon account. He remembered that Alexa, by default, saved a history of commands and interactions. He also remembered that, due to technical quirks, it sometimes recorded conversations that weren't actual voice commands, especially if features like drop-in or other communication settings had been accidentally left on. He'd enabled those features months ago to test them and then forgotten to fully disable them. With trembling hands, Ben grabbed his laptop. He logged into the Amazon account, navigated to the Alexa history, and saw thousands of entries, light commands, weather questions, cooking timers. He started filtering by date, going back 3 months. That's when he saw them. Mixed in with the regular commands were recordings. Snippets of conversations. Most were meaningless fragments, seconds of background TV noise, random laughter. But some were longer. Ben clicked on a recording from 3 weeks earlier. It was from the bedroom. He heard his own voice saying something about getting home late from school. Then silence. Then Sophie's voice, but different. A tone he didn't recognize. Intimate. Low. Saying, he's already left. You can come over. Ben paused the recording. Took a deep breath. Hit play again. More silence. Then a man's voice, I only have an hour. What time does he get back? Sophie answered, around 4. We've got time. Ben's blood seemed to freeze in his veins. He skipped ahead to another recording. Then another. And another. It was like assembling a gruesome puzzle. Fragments of conversations. Sophie laughing in a way she never laughed with him. Intimate sounds that confirmed the betrayal. The man's voice sounded familiar, but Ben couldn't place it. He kept searching, recording after recording, until he found one from 2 weeks earlier. Clear voices. Sophie saying, Ryan's different from Ben. He makes me feel alive. And the man's reply, Ben's too uptight. He doesn't suspect a thing. Ryan. The name hit Ben like a punch to the gut. Ryan Morrison. A distant cousin of Sophie's. He'd shown up 4 months earlier saying he was in town for work, construction or something like that. Sophie said Ryan had offered to help renovate the basement, which they'd been planning to convert into a home gym. Ben had thought it was great, saved them money. Ryan seemed like a decent guy. He spent 3 weeks showing up at the house, supposedly working on the basement while Ben was at school. Ben had even offered to pay him, but Ryan refused, saying it was a family favor. Ben spent the rest of the night listening to recordings. Each one worse than the last. Sophie and Ryan talking about trips they'd take together. Sophie complaining about Ben. Calling him boring. Predictable. A loser who's still teaching at the same school after 15 years. Saying their intimate life had been completely disconnected for years. Every word was a stab. Ben wanted to stop, but couldn't. He needed to know everything. It was in a recording from 10 days earlier that Ben found the worst revelation. Sophie and Ryan talking after being together. Ryan asked if Sophie had thought about the plan. She replied, I have. I'll say I'm pregnant. Ben will be happy, he'll give me whatever I ask for. I can buy myself at least 6 months before I lose the baby. That's enough time to get everything organized. Ryan laughed. And after? Sophie sighed. Then I'll say I want a divorce. That he neglected me during the pregnancy. That I feel alone. I could even claim he was a dangerous husband. My sister can back me up if I ask her. I get the house, a cut of his assets, and we disappear together. Ben shut the laptop. He sat alone in the dark living room, hearing only his own breath. He didn't cry. Something inside him had broken, but the pain hadn't arrived yet. It was as if he were watching someone else's life collapse. He glanced at the clock, 5:30 a.m. He hadn't slept at all. He had class in 3 hours, but he knew he couldn't teach. He called the school and said he was sick. It wasn't a lie. He felt constantly nauseous. By 7 a.m., Ben had called James Mitchell, a lawyer who'd been his college roommate. He explained the situation. James told him to come to the office right away. By 9 a.m., Ben was sitting in a leather chair in an office that smelled of coffee and paper, showing James the recordings. The lawyer listened with growing seriousness. When he finished, James leaned back in his chair. Ben, this is solid evidence. You've got clear proof of what she was planning. He paused. But I need to warn you, this is going to be devastating when it all comes out. Are you absolutely sure you want to go down this road? Ben didn't hesitate. I am. James moved fast. Within 6 hours, he'd prepared all the documentation, copies of the recordings on 3 separate USB drives, printed transcripts, instructions for next steps. Ben returned home that evening. The house was still empty. Sophie had texted saying she needed one more day at her sister's. Ben replied simply, okay. Come Saturday. We need to talk. Saturday arrived. Sophie showed up around noon, looking rested, almost cheerful. She wore new leggings and a tight top Ben didn't recognize. She walked in and tossed her bag on the couch. Hey. Sorry about Thursday. I overreacted. She smiled like nothing had happened. Ben was sitting in the living room armchair. It's fine. Sit down. I want to show you something. Sophie sat on the couch, still smiling. Ben turned on the TV. He'd already plugged in one of the USB drives. Sophie frowned. What's this? Ben pressed play. Her voice filled the room, the bedroom recording. Sophie saying, he's already left. You can come over. Ryan's voice. Sophie laughing. Her smile vanished instantly. She went pale. Ben, I can explain. Quiet. Ben's voice came out firm. He'd never spoken to her like that before. You're going to sit and listen. All of it. For 23 minutes, Sophie listened to her own betrayals played back in crystal clear audio. Every conversation. Every plan. Every insult. Ben watched her face change, shock, then panic, then something like calculation, as if she were trying to figure out how to get out of this. When the recording about the fake pregnancy and the false accusation of abuse played, Sophie tried to turn off the TV. Ben already had the remote. No. He stood up. You're going to listen to the end. When it finished, the room fell silent. Sophie was crying, but Ben felt no pity. They were the tears of someone who'd been caught, not genuine remorse. She tried to move closer. Ben, I was confused. Ryan manipulated me. I never would have actually done it, it was just talk. Don't lie. Not even now. Ben crossed his arms. You know what's funny, Sophie? You asked for privacy. I gave it to you. You unplugged the Alexa. But you forgot that technology fails. You forgot backups exist. You forgot that I'm the idiot who set up this whole house. Sophie sobbed. I love you. It was a mistake. We can get past this. You called me a boring loser. Said our life together was a lie. Planned to fake a pregnancy and make up a story that I was a dangerous husband just to take my house. That's not a mistake, Sophie. That's who you really are. The front door opened. Sophie turned in alarm. It was her sister, Amanda, whom Ben had texted the night before. Amanda looked from Sophie to Ben, confused. Ben, you said it was urgent. Ben looked at Amanda. Your sister's been having an affair with Ryan Morrison for months. In our house. In our bed. And she was planning to fake a pregnancy and fabricate a story about me to take everything. He pointed to the TV. It's all recorded, including the part where she said you'd testify for her, even though you'd know it was a lie. Amanda's jaw dropped. Sophie stood up. Amanda, it's not like that. He's twisting things. Want to hear the recordings? Ben cut in. I can play them again. Amanda stared at her sister with disgust. You did this? You actually planned this? When Sophie didn't answer, just kept crying, Amanda shook her head. I'm not going to lie for you. Ever. She walked out, slamming the door. Sophie turned to Ben. She tried anger. You recorded me without permission. That's illegal. I'll sue. I've already consulted a lawyer. The recordings are admissible. Ben sat back down, suddenly exhausted. You're leaving my house now. You can take your clothes. Everything else stays. On Monday, you'll be served with divorce papers. I have proof of everything. And if you try to spread lies about me, I'll release these recordings. Understood? Sophie kept arguing. She begged. She even tried flirting. Nothing worked. Finally, she packed her clothes into a suitcase, sobbing, saying Ben would regret this, that she had lawyers too, that she'd prove he'd emotionally abused her. The threats sounded hollow. She left the house at 4 p.m., tossing her wedding ring onto the coffee table before slamming the door. Ben was alone again. He looked at the ring glinting on the wood, picked it up, and put it in a drawer. Maybe he'd sell it later. Or throw it away. It didn't matter. He called James and confirmed Sophie had left. The divorce process would start Monday. With the evidence he had, Ben knew it would go in his favor. The divorce took 4 months. Sophie tried to argue invasion of privacy, but failed. She tried to claim Ben was at fault, but had no proof. She tried to get witnesses, but even her own sister refused. Ryan Morrison disappeared from town as soon as he heard about the recordings, leaving no trace. Sophie was left to face the consequences alone. The gym where Sophie worked terminated her contract once some clients heard about the scandal. News spreads fast in a small town. She tried opening her own studio, but her reputation was ruined. No one wanted to train with the woman who'd cheated on her beloved community teacher and plotted fraud. She eventually moved to Cincinnati, where no one knew her. Ben went back to teaching. The first few months were hard. He lost weight, slept poorly, avoided social events. But slowly, the wound began to heal. Coworkers offered support. Friends invited him to dinners. Ben declined most but started accepting a few. He returned to the gym, this time with a different trainer, a 60-year-old man named Harold who talked only about technique and never about personal life. 8 months after the divorce, Ben was organizing the basement when he found a box of old photos. Wedding photos. Vacation snapshots. Sophie smiling in every one. Ben looked at those images and felt no anger. No pain. Just indifference. It was like looking at someone he'd known long ago and no longer found relevant. He put the photos back in the box and shoved it to the back of the closet. Maybe he'd throw it away someday. Or maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. On a spring Saturday, nearly a year after the discovery, Ben was at the grocery store when he saw Sophie. She was in the produce section, looking tired, thinner, with shorter hair. She saw him too and froze. For a second, it looked like she might approach. Ben just gave a brief nod and walked down another aisle. There was nothing left to say. No further revenge needed. Life had already exacted her price. Ben went home, put away his groceries, and turned on the kitchen Echo Dot. Alexa, play jazz from the 50s. Music filled the kitchen as he made dinner. The house was silent, but not empty. It was his space now. His refuge. And he'd learned something valuable. Technology could fail, people could betray you, but the truth always found its way into the light, especially when Alexa was listening. Ben smiled for the first time in months. It wasn't a smile of full happiness. It was the smile of a man who'd survived, learned, and moved forward. And that was enough. For now, it was more than enough. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.